This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Franny's Pharmacy.
Now more than ever, it's important that our society focuses more on our mental and physical health. At Franny's Pharmacy, the team is committed to their community's need of being happy, healthy, and stress-free. Come learn how Franny's Pharmacy can assist you in a clean, professional environment with their expert bud tenders that are excited to educate you about the benefits of their lab-tested, DEA-certified CBD products. Franny's Pharmacy also offers wholesale and franchise opportunities. Visit their website at frannysPharmacy.com, and that's pharmacy with an F, and use the promo code CannaConnect10 for an exclusive Cannabinoid Connect discount. Again, that's Franny's Pharmacy with an F.com and use the promo code CannaConnect10 for an exclusive Cannabinoid Connect discount. Franny's Pharmacy, putting the farm back into pharmacy.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Canna Health.
Hey cannabis consumers, have you ever consumed a cannabis product thinking it'll make you feel a certain way, but then it doesn't? Don't you wish you had a clear understanding of your own DNA so that you could make informed decisions about what type of cannabis products interact best with your system? Well, now you can with EndoDNA. EndoDNA is a simple DNA test that maps your entire endocannabinoid system and then matches that summary with a specific cannabinoid ratio and terpene profile that best aligns with your unique genotype. Imagine being armed with personal information when visiting a dispensary. You'll have the knowledge and power and capability to purchase products that best align with your genotype. Visit their website to purchase the EndoDNA Collection Kit and Endo Decoded Report at endodna.com/products and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. Again, that's endodna.com/products and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. The future of cannabinoid therapeutics is here with EndoDNA. Mark, what's going on?
Hey, what's up, man? Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for coming on. Really excited to be talking with you today. And we're going to make this conversation around soil and fertilization and organics. I mean, we're going to make it interesting and fun today, Mark. I'm excited. I know that that's your passion and really what you're focused on as CEO of GreenGro Biologicals.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, anything soil driven, fertilizer driven, a lot of probiotics. I mean, we specialize in like soil life, soil health, things like that. So
awesome. Well, before we jump into that, let's first talk about you, Mark. Tell me a little bit about your background. What led you to the cannabis space, operating as the CEO of GreenGro?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously I grew up around it because I grew up in kind of the Emerald Triangle, kind of northern Sonoma County, kind of Mendocino County line. So, always kind of seeing it in its infancy growing. A few of my dad's friends, I found out later on that they were growing up in Mendocino, and I would work for them in the summer times before going to college to earn money. So I kind of saw a little bit of the industry then, and kind of saw how they were growing and how they were doing stuff and what they were working with. And I kind of made a mental note going, this is kind of strange. It doesn't seem like they're using very sophisticated products or methods, And then I took off. I went to college in Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, and I studied a totally different path. I studied archaeology. So, I was going to be an archaeologist because my family, we did a lot of archaeology in my family, mostly Native American archaeology. So I started kind of going down that path, and unfortunately, that led me back to agriculture because I started studying the archaeology of agriculture. So how different ancient cultures approached agriculture, how they set up their agricultural system. And that was fascinating to me. So I kind of made that my focus in the archaeology major because I thought it was crazy that, 500 to 1,000 years ago, native cultures in Central and South America had populations bigger than any other city almost on the planet at the time. 100,000 people the Mayans had, and Aztecs and things like that. And I'm thinking in my head, well, you can't have 100,000 people in a city without sophisticated agriculture. can't just like wing
Right.
it, you know?
Right.
So that got me thinking, and I thought, okay.
Well, what were, sorry to pause you there, but what were some of those ancient agricultural techniques that you became fascinated with that kind of, I guess, got you your start?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the Mayans, the Aztecs, Native Americans of, North America, but I mean, most specifically, I was studying in South America in the Amazonian basin. There was native tribes, there could have been offshoots of the Incans and others, but more generalized native to the Amazonian basin. And they had soil there that to this day, as archaeologists, we think is one of the most fertile soil plains on the planet. And they call it anthropomorphic, or it's anthropocentric soil, which means like people created that soil. So we saw that the soil was like rich and dark and fertile, and we couldn't figure it out. And then we started studying the soil as archaeologists and realizing there was stuff in there called biochar, and there was like remnants of like their garbage piles, which back then there was no plastics or metal, so it was compost piles.
Right.
So what they were doing, we figured out, was they were taking biochar, which is charred hardwood, mixing it with their compost piles or the trash piles in fish, and they were mixing that into the soil, and they would go on, to their winter home or their spring home, and when they come back, the soil would be ready to plant into.
Wow.
And yeah, so they had to this day, they had been kind of extinct from the region for 400 or 500 years, and to this day the soil is still like the most potent living soil on the planet. So
that's incredible. And well, when I was reading your biography, I saw that when you founded GreenGro in 2009, it was with mycorrhizae and beneficial bacteria blends. So is that kind of the same concept of what these Mayans were doing?
So they were basically creating like probiotic living soils, and maybe they didn't know what they were doing, maybe they did know what they were doing, but like, using biochar as a catalyst for organic life in the soil. So like beneficial bacteria and mycelium and mycorrhiza are all attracted to carbon rich soils, and obviously having a food source there. So like, you can't really have living soil or any soil that's alive without mycorrhizal fungi, right? Because that's what's creating the connection between the plant and the soil. But secondary to that was the bacteria. So we studied, obviously what they were doing in their soil preparations, and then I distilled it down from even there and said, okay, we can make this soil preparation into a soil amendment. That's great, but how do we replicate the bacteria and fungi, the mycorrhiza? So that's what kind of led me into that path first, because I could have launched the product, that we have a product called Earthshine. That's kind of like the essence of what the, Native Americans were making down there. But I thought it was like too hard for the public, wasn't really quite ready to understand that yet. So I was like, well, maybe I need to start with probiotics. Like people understand probiotics. They understand, basically I was calling it yogurt for your plants, So like people understood probiotics and drinking them and eating yogurt, things like that, how your body helps digest food better when you have probiotics in your stomach. So I was like, okay, when I got out of college, I was like, what would be the easiest thing for people to understand? And so I tried to distill it down to the most basic thing, which was the probiotics,
Yeah.
Now, the whole time though, like Native American archaeology and agriculture is the most fascinating thing. So
it sounds like, I mean, that you're just giving me probably one taste of what you kind of discovered among, others. Is there any others that you feel are noteworthy enough that would fascinate the audience?
Yeah, there's in Central America, the Mayans and even some of the Aztecs, they would do these types of mound systems where they'd have almost like a drainage ditch that would go around a moat, right? And they would have the water flood in at an angle. So they had to make it so it was right angle so the water would flood in. And then the mound of soil would be where they plant the agriculture crops, if it was corn or soy or whatever they had.
Mm-hmm.
And so the water that went around the moat would keep the bottom roots always, drinking water, and they wouldn't have to water it. So
Wow.
yeah, and so they'd use their little like fertilizer preparations that they were doing to make the soil richer. They'd plant their seed, and then they'd walk away because they'd have these little systems in place, you know?
Talk about working smarter, not
Uh,
harder, right? Like,
Absolutely. Oh yeah. I mean, and then you got to think about it like we're just discovering the last like 30 years like about compost and the importance of like, mixing different types of amendments and things like that together. And like this is all they were using. So they were using like native crops that they hand harvested with organic amendments and like biologicals and clean water. It was just mind blowing, you know?
yeah, it's incredible. It really is. So ahead of their time, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Going back to living soil. So I love how you were saying, like, from a basic standpoint, you kind of just explained like how would living soil compare to maybe traditional soil that cannabis cultivators may
Yeah.
want to use.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the concept of living soil is that instead of you're forcing your plant's roots to digest everything that you're feeding it, like with traditional cannabis farming, especially indoor guys that are doing indoor warehouses and things like that, they're using sterile mediums, which means they're just like cocoa perlite or peat perlite. They want it to be sterile. They don't want anything living in it. And then they're going to drip feed like liquid nutrients and water. So basically, imagine it like you have a needle going into a vein, you're sitting in a hospital bed, and they're feeding you exactly what you want, right?
Right, right.
So that's
One line going in, right?
yeah, yeah, and that that's fine. It will grow a plant, it will keep a human alive, but it's not going to help them thrive. So the other concept would be, okay, if I wanted to make that person very healthy, I would make sure to first start with their gut biome because most illnesses happen with your gut biome or your microbiology in your body. Your the beneficial bacteria that goes through your whole body, your system. So you get that working correctly first to digest your food properly. And that means the more food that we put into you that's good and healthy, the more nutrients you're going to absorb, right? So living soil is exactly that. You're putting not only organic amendments, but you're putting all the trace minerals into the soil, mineral balancing. And then you're using the microbes to break that down and feed it to the plant. So the roots of the plant are just really there to absorb what the microbes bring to it, you know?
Right.
And so it's a different concept. It's kind of like, again, you could use the example of I can drink a Red Bull to get energy, or I can eat an apple that's going to give me long, sustained energy over time, right?
Instead of
So,
that harsh crash that a
yep,
sugar rush would give you, right? And
yep,
whereas what you're saying, a more natural sugar maybe comes from a fruit,
yep,
where you can burn that energy and but not feel that, like, I can't use a better word than crash, right? I mean,
yeah.
just
No,
that's yeah.
and that's exactly right. So if we look at the hydroponics market and we look at indoor growing and we look at greenhouse growing, if they mess up and they forget to water that nutrient solution to the plants, the whole room could go down in a few days, maybe 1 or 2 days max. Now, if you have a true living soil and all you're worrying about is just watering the plants throughout the week, it's so much more forgiving, it's so much more lush, and there's so much more life to the plants that way, right?
Right.
So the plants are thriving. So living soil to me is like the lost bridge connection that we have to our ancient agriculture because we got away from it. I mean, 100 years ago, we decided, well, we can make fertilizers from fossil fuels. So we're going to say that that's the new green revolution, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that day in the sand is when we started using, you know, ammonium phosphate and diammonium phosphate and urea and all these things, these chemical salts, right? That grow things, but they strip the soil of all its life. So, I think anyone that's, growing with salts specifically is going to tell you that, yeah, we can grow a plant, but there's no real essence to it. When we talk about cannabis specifically, the most terpene production, the most cannabinoid production comes from living soil.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no doubt about that. Like I will bet anyone in the market or the industry that if you grew with just salts and just a sterile medium, versus growing a plant in true living soil with proper mineral balancing, you will have the best quality organic, cannabis on earth.
So is this like the best kept secret? I mean, do people know about this? I obviously we're talking about it on this podcast, but how well known is this in the industry?
They know about it. The thing is what it comes down to is that when you're doing a huge, like, 50,000 square foot indoor, lit production, they want ease of use. They want repeatability, right? And for some reason, they think that having a sterile medium and just pumping, salt into the solution is the easiest way to do it, because that's what all of the predecessors before them have done in terms of big ag, right? So all the systems that cannabis is using now, they're just getting into over the last 10 years, big ag systems. And big ag systems are set for salt, So to try to say, okay, I want to use a dosatron with tank fed systems on a Nexus system that's going to tell me all times what my temperature is in the room and, how much ppms my water is at. That's all built around salt. It'd be like, again, trying to work on an electric Tesla and all you have is parts from a gas powered motor.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to work because it's not a compatible system. But
right.
There's tons of guys, even in in Colorado and California and Maine, Michigan and stuff, that are doing this true living soil system, and they're finding ways to build the system out to make it very successful,
When you talk about the big ag kind of practices, is that pertain to the larger MSOs, or is that across the board, small mom and pops to medium size as well?
It's more medium to the large, size ones. I mean, I don't like to say names of different companies, but I mean, like say, the guys that are running, 50 to 100 lights, they want it to be daisy chained. They want it to be, just pieced together so that it's simple. And I mean, I could show someone very simply how you could build a true living system and just rinse and repeat it. But there's a stigma in our industry about throwing out soil, right? They want to throw their soil out and not reuse it. So that's a really, that's been a concept for the last 20 years, is that
seems wasteful, no?
It's very wasteful, and it's very, very common. I mean, most growers that we talk to say, oh, I wouldn't want to reuse my soil. And you're like, why not? And it's really getting to the point of they don't want to reuse it because it's dead. They don't want to reuse it because it's full of salts. And they don't want to reuse it because plants that are grown with just salt-based nutrients are susceptible to powdery mildew, mold, botrytis, every disease under the sun. So
wow, so that's interesting. Because so really, it sounds like if they keep following that traditional path of big ag, which are some techniques that are being incorporated in this new burgeoning industry, which is cannabis, that it's almost like they're hurting themselves in the long run, and not only for themselves, but the environment from a sustainability perspective, because they're throwing away the soil, which is in their eyes ruined because of the salt, whereas they could be using living soil and reuse and reuse and reuse.
Exactly. I mean, because it always comes down to a cost perspective with these large MSOs, and it's like, well, how much does it cost to buy new soil 4 times a year, 3 times a year, rather than using your soil for 2 or 3 years? I mean, because, with this living soil technique, I mean, I have guys on their 5th year.
Wow.
Wow. So, and that's the whole point with living soil, is like, when everyone's been to their family's property or someone's family's property where the soil has been cultivated organically for 20, 30, 40 years, and that soil is so rich and you can grow anything in it,
Mm-hmm.
So that's the whole concept of living soil. You can take soil components, and with the right biology, you can make it look like a soil that's been cultivated for 20 years.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all about the mycorrhizal fungi and the bacteria work together to dissolve the soil particles and make it carbon rich and make it full of life.
And when you say carbon rich, I mean, that is ideal for the cannabis plant, because what other plant takes in more CO2
Yeah.
emissions than cannabis, right?
Yeah. It's perfect. I mean, carbon sequestration too. I mean, like, the USDA just came out with a grant. They're like, hey, we need billions of dollars of people to get in and teach us how to sequester carbon into the soil with agriculture. You know what does that is true
Grow,
living soil.
yeah. How about true living soil and grow cannabis?
Cannabis and hemp.
Yeah,
So a lot of the grants are going to be issued from USDA this year and next year are going to be hemp and cannabis with organic living soil. And it's going to happen on a big scale. And they're going to say, the big ag industries are going to say, oh, you can't do that. It's not cost effective, blah, blah, blah. But what the alternative was is that there was a dust bowl back in the day when we first started tilling the soil over and over again and using salts. And then now we have agriculture in California where we're now just basically growing in sand because we've killed everything out here. And so the water drains off, the fertilizer drains off in the oceans and things like that because the soil is dead. So we can say that it's not economically viable currently, or we can work to make it economically viable in the future so that the agricultural lands in America stay healthy for hundreds of years.
right. And I definitely would prefer the latter. I mean, it does take some critical thinking and some long-term planning, but what better industry to do that than cannabis, which is at the forefront of just starting, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, putting in best practices for cannabis right now is, to me, going back a little bit on the salt thing, I can't understand a crop that, I mean, I know that some cannabis growers will argue with me that it's not, the prices aren't great right now, but if you can grow something like cannabis, and even if you're getting $400 a pound for it, I mean, geez, that is such a better ROI than growing strawberries or blueberries or,
Mm-hmm.
any crop that's out there.
Right.
For the amount of, effort that you put into growing it, you have a huge ROI still. So this is an industry where we can bake in these type of organic and sustainable practices and then make the cannabis even better and more valuable at the same time.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm totally on board. I'm sold with it, Mark. It sounds like the most logical solution. I want to ask you, does it seem like currently that more craft cannabis farms are gravitating to
Yeah.
the living soil techniques as opposed to the bigger dogs?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, craft, anyone that you've seen that's really won some really nice cups recently, I would bet you that they have a craft. Either they have a craft farm as part of their portfolio, or they're growing in a craft manner in terms of like they're doing living soil, organic amendment top dressing,
What's
compost
that? What
tea.
is that?
So the organic top dressing is another thing that GreenGro makes, like where it's like at turn of the century America, our fertilizer source was, I got some crab meal, some fish meal, some bone meal, some blood meal, some feather meal, like, whatever we could get from our, you know,
From the hunt
from the hunt,
or the market? Yeah.
or from the farm, right? So say you're a pig farmer and a cow farmer and a chicken farmer. Well, you have all this like poultry waste, you have all this like feathers and bones and everything left over, and they would grind all that stuff up and compost it and give it to the farmers to grow their crops with, right?
Wow.
So that's what GreenGro does. So we take our fertilizers are like a dry powder that's made out of like fish meal and fish bone meal and crab and crustacean meal and like feather meal and all these different amendments mixed together. So it gives you every single thing that your soil would ever want from you, right? Because it's not, you're feeding your soil, you're not feeding your plant.
Right.
That's the mind shift that has to happen. The moment that happens in your brain, you're like, oh crap, I'm feeding the soil, not the plant. The plant then, the land takes care of us, right?
It almost makes me think, Mark, like people that are new to exercising and say they're doing a really good job of being physically active by running or lifting or whatever, but they haven't been disciplined on their diet, or they haven't thought about, focusing on their diet. And so really over time, they're seeing that they may be getting stronger, or their endurance may be getting built up, right, from running or the cardio aspect, but they may not see total changes physically because of the diet aspect, right?
Yep.
Is that a fair, analogy?
No, that's a great analogy. I mean, they say, 80% of your body is in the kitchen and 20% is working out, because for that same reason, because, people want to have abs, but they don't realize that you have to get rid of what's on top of here first to show the abs. And, that's eating properly and changing the way you diet, so.
Right. I mean, and that's everything to carbs. I mean, like if you
Yeah.
want to get to that status of the six pack, I mean, that's sacrificing, take the bun off, right? Eat the patty, like, grilled chicken. So it's very interesting. So it almost sounds like the soil is really the foundation, and you got to make sure that all the nutrients and that the soil itself is in the right place before you can actually start to grow from that foundation.
Everything we need to do, like everything we do at GreenGro, is mimicry of nature. Okay, because nature can do it better than we can. I know we think we're smart, but mimicry of nature. So now here's a concept for everyone listening. Imagine every plant that's growing out in the field right now. Go outside and look. There's grass growing, right? There's trees growing. Who fertilizes that? Right? The wild grasses, the wild trees, who fertilizes that? Why are they able to grow, yet most Americans kill the plants they buy, right? They can't keep all the plants they have alive. Why is that? It's because of the probiotics, specifically the mycorrhizal fungi, right? So if we talk about that, mycorrhizal fungi is like a microscopic mushroom that grows in little filaments under the soil. And what it does is it basically connects like a little spider web, like a needle going into the vein of the plant. The plant talks to it through biochemical signals. It says, "Hey, I'm hungry. I would like some phosphorus." And the mycorrhiza goes, "Okay, I'll get you some phosphorus. Will you give me some sugar?" And the plant goes, "Yes." So then it instantly goes, like an electrical signal goes out. The mycorrhiza goes out, pulls the phosphorus in through its little filaments, and it brings it to the plant. And the plant gets its sugar. That's exactly how the world around everyone works.
It's amazing.
Literally. Yeah. So the concept too is like, if that's the case, then no one on earth, no plant, no tree would be alive right now if it wasn't for mycorrhizal fungi. Like literally nothing.
I saw that documentary on Netflix of, what was it, fungi, and it was fascinating. I mean, it's exactly what you're saying in terms of like everything living is because of fungi.
Yep. Everything alive. Like the soil could have never been colonized by plant life until the fungi came first. So that's the thing. And when we leave this planet, as Elon Musk says we're going to do, when we go to Mars, the first thing we have to bring on our ships is that we have to bring mycorrhiza. So I'd love to sell him some, but that's the whole thing. So why are we fighting against our own nature, growing in sterile medias with salt?
Why is that? What do you think it is? I mean, obviously, probably competing industries, profit, greed.
Like I said,
ignorance. I don't know.
They built the matrix around it so that you can't break out of the matrix of growing with salt in our media. So everything from
but it seems like that in every aspect, in so many different industries where we're boxed in, and it's hard to get out because it's almost like it's the industry or those within it are dependent on it.
It's convenience, really. I mean, it's also that this already works. They think it works. It's repeatable. Why change it? I mean, that's the most common thing ever. Like, hey, what I'm doing works. Why change it? And I'm like, yeah, you can just exist in life, or you can thrive. So, I mean, my diet, like for me, I didn't really have a big problem eating gluten, right? But my wife had to take it out of her diet. And then once I took it out of my diet, I realized that's weird. I have a lot more energy. My joints don't hurt. That's strange. So yeah, I could live by eating gluten, sure, but when I took it out of my diet, my joints don't hurt as much anymore. So I can live a better life by changing the parameters, and gluten is in everything, right? So,
Right,
you
right.
know, you can't avoid it unless you're really mindful of it. So for these guys, these big MSOs, it's like you can be mindful of how to set up a living soil facility. There are ways to do it. There's tons of guys that are doing it. I know that there's guys out there that are doing 1,000 lights with a living soil setup, but they're not going to teach everyone how to do it because they're the ones who have the best flower in the market. They're the
Right.
guys that have the highest terpene counts. And so because of that, they're going to be like, okay, why am I going to teach my competitor how to do this?
Right. I love that you shared that example of like, your diet and like what you've had to do to switch it to avoid kind of what was not
Mhm.
making you feel good, and now you do feel better because you've made that adjustment, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of that mind, the word is mindful you used, and that's been the theme, at least in my perspective, since the pandemic started, right?
Yeah.
And this is a good segue because we've talked about, food and the importance of diet, and how that relates to the importance of the soil and in living soil, right? What can people do to basically be more mindful of what they're growing, say, in their backyard garden? Right? Like, what
Yeah.
are some organic growing gardening techniques? People are living off the grid now. They're moving out of cities. They're
Yeah.
wanting to be more mindful, as you've said.
Yeah. I mean, I think, understanding a concept called compost tea brewing. I mean, that would be something that would help change the backyard growers experience a lot. And what is
What's
simply
that?
so a compost tea is really anything that what you're trying to do is you're trying to get microbes in your water and you're trying to multiply them. So in 50 years ago, my grandfather and guys like that would take their fresh compost pile that's like fresh and everything. They take a handful of compost, throw it in like a 55-gallon barrel of water, with an air stone, and they throw a little bit of beer or something like that into the water because the beer is the carbohydrates and the sugar, and that would they bubble that for 12 hours. And what that does is it wakes up all the microbes and multiplies them and multiplies them and multiplies them, right? And then they would dump that water on their garden once a week.
Hmm.
And so what that did is it just kept enhancing and building the colonies of microbes in their soil so that the people didn't have to be as dependent on fertilizing, right? There's so much fertilizer in most soils that are just not available, you know?
Mm-hmm.
There's minerals in the soil that are not available because they haven't been broken down. So the best thing that any grower can do is do a simple compost tea. You can literally go get a 5-gallon bucket and an air stone from an aquarium store. You put some purified water in the bucket, and there's tons of products that you can go out there and buy that are super simple to use. But if they want to go super cheap, get some worm castings, a handful of that, throw it in a bucket of water with, I throw a little bit of beer, like Guinness is what I think I use most of the time in my garden because it's a rich, beer that can go in there.
Yeah.
And the worm castings and maybe a little bit of, if you have any dry amendments laying around, like bone meal, blood meal, whatever. You mix that into the water and you bubble it for a few hours, you'll start seeing this foam form on top, right? And that foam is the active aeration of the microbes. So you'll see their colonies growing just by looking at the foam that's building on your bucket. And that means that you have so much life there. So all you do is you take that tea once a week when you're a backyard gardener, dump it on your soil.
Just keep
That,
dumping it, and that's even before you've planted, right? You're
sure.
kind of,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Get it active and stuff. I mean, that's a simple hack that people don't know about. It's super inexpensive to do. And once you get it down, it's like, whoa, there's a huge difference in the plant health. Like huge.
Wow.
Yeah.
Super interesting. That's a really good tip. I'm sure a lot of people listening or watching are going to appreciate that. Any others that you can think
Yeah.
of?
I mean, usually just from a soil perspective, I mean, look at your soil. Like if your soil has been there and it's tired and old and it's been there for years and years and years, most likely it's been broken down so much into fine particles that there's not enough oxygen in the soil. So the roots your plants aren't very healthy because it's like so dense. So I always tell people, fluff that soil up, either get a little bit of fresh peat moss from the store, get some perlite, which is like little teeny rocks, little white rocks that kind of fluff the soil up,
Mm-hmm.
or mix in a little bit of like, biochar or compost, kind of just, mix that soil up a little bit so that it's not as condensed, and freshen it up. And usually just by aerating the soil, you get lava rock, depends on which part of the country you're in, lava rock, perlite, peat moss, cocoa core, all those little components you can fluff your soil up with, and that's going to increase the oxygen levels in your soil. And that will help people like dramatically for the season,
Awesome. Awesome. Really good
Yeah.
tips, Mark. Really appreciate it. Well, as we wrap up here, I want to give you the floor, man. I mean, what else is top of mind for you that we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I mean, in terms of gardening in general, I guess I would just say, people need to treat their garden kind of like they treat their body. I mean, most people, when they say they have a brown thumb, I always hear, well, I have a brown thumb, I always kill plants. I'm like, okay, well, did you water them? Did you feed them? Did you clean them? I mean, like those three things right there is what you do for your body, right?
Right. Right.
Well, and if you don't do those three things every day for your plant, then you're not going to be a successful gardener. It's like having a pet. Garden is like having a pet. You have this little thing that you have to do every night. You might not have to water every night, but you might have to feed or fertilize it, or you might have to just like check the canopy out and clean it up and make sure there's no bugs on it. Or you need to give it probiotics. Like for
Plants don't
me,
even go to the bathroom. That's the like, you know what I mean? So there's no excuse for plants dying. I mean, come
oh
on.
yeah,
You don't got to
it's
take them out.
my dad. I mean, and that's my thing is like we talk about diet. It's like, okay, a lot of people nowadays they're drinking yogurt, I mean, eating yogurt, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, dude, your plant's the same as you. They have a digestive system. It's called their roots.
Right.
If their roots don't have a bunch of probiotics on it, they're not going to feel very good, So I would just tell people to make your gardening experience better, just treat your plants like a pet and it'll be easy.
Right. Very good advice. Treat your plants like your pets, people. Come on,
Yep.
water and feed them and clean them. That's what we do for our own bodies. It makes a lot of sense, Mark. I really appreciate your time, man. I've learned a lot today about ancient agriculture techniques and living soil and how craft cannabis farmers are utilizing living soil and how large MSOs can do the same, for long-term sustainability best practices. So,
no, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, if people are curious, I do like weekly lives on Instagram Live. We do weekly kind of how-to tips of the week videos just for like the dumbest questions you can think of, like why are my plants brown? We answer questions like that. So, and then we have a YouTube channel where we kind of do longer videos. So
love it. Where can people find those?
yeah, so on Instagram, it's at the GreenGro with no W. And then on YouTube, it's GreenGro Biologicals.
Got you. Hey, and quick question before we go. GreenGro Biologicals, and I see the logo is like a lion, and I see we talked about this before the podcast before we recorded. You've got this amazing portrait of a lion behind you. So what's the significance there?
Well, yeah, I mean the significance there is we're kind of like looking at the primal ancient nature, like so we talk about taking pride in your garden, right? And like a lion has a pride. A group of lions is called a pride, and a lion is the king of the jungle, the king of the grasslands, So you're basically trying to take control of your garden and be prideful in your garden, by kind of emulating what a lion means to people. Like, why is a lion the king? Why is he an apex predator? That's kind of where it comes from. And also because, we want to come from, the ancients, and the lion was always really important to ancient cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And we come from ancient agriculture. Our company is founded upon ancient agriculture. So the lion, we feel like, represents us.
I love it. Makes a lot of sense, Mark. Well, thank you so much again, man. Look forward to seeing you guys continue to grow and, start to really help this industry implement more sustainable best practices when it comes to their soil. So,
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you all for listening. Bye.